The wind howls across a valley long forgotten, carrying the whispers of ancient prophecies. Bones, brittle and scattered, lie under the scorching sun, yet something stirs in the dry, silent earth. The scrolls tremble as the voice of a prophet echoes, a vision of life from death, of hope from despair, hidden for centuries in Ezekiel's valley of dry bones. What secrets lie in this prophetic vision? What does it reveal about our fate, our souls, and the divine plan? Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments, and if stories like this one move your heart, make sure to subscribe. Imagine walking through the desert where prophets once walked. The ground cracked and parched beneath your feet, the sun casting shadows that seem to stretch into eternity. The air carries a stillness that feels alive, as if the whispers of ancient voices linger just beyond hearing. This is the Valley of Dry Bones, a place spoken of in the visions of Ezekiel, where divine mysteries unfold in ways that both terrify and inspire. The story begins with a vision, a revelation that has captured the imagination of believers and scholars for thousands of years. Ezekiel, a prophet exiled from his homeland, found himself transported, not in body but in spirit, to a valley filled with bones. Dry, scattered, lifeless, yet strangely arranged, as though waiting for a story that only God could tell. The prophet was told to prophesy to the bones, and as his voice echoed through the desolate expanse, the unthinkable began to happen. This vision is more than an ancient tale. It is a message that speaks to the heart of humanity. The bones represent not just a forgotten people, but forgotten hopes, dreams buried under centuries of despair. They are a mirror of our own lives, the moments when faith falters and the world feels empty and cold. And yet, even in the midst of hopelessness, there is the promise of renewal, of life restored, of a purpose hidden beneath the dust. To understand the Valley of Dry Bones, we must step into the world of Ezekiel, a man torn between obedience to God and the anguish of exile. He lived in a time of upheaval, when the kingdom of Israel lay in ruins, its people scattered and its future uncertain. The prophet's vision was not a mere allegory. It was a divine warning, a message meant to stir hearts, awaken souls, and remind a broken people that even in the bleakest circumstances, God's plan remains alive. But the mystery does not end with Ezekiel's prophecy. Scholars and theologians have long debated the deeper meaning of this vision. Was it solely spiritual, a metaphor for national restoration? Or did it carry a more personal message, one that touches each of us individually? Some suggest the bones are a symbol of transformation, a call to awaken the faith that slumbers within us. Others see a hidden chronology, a code pointing to events yet to unfold, where divine intervention intersects with human history in ways that challenge understanding. And then there are those who whisper of relics, objects, scrolls or remnants tied to this ancient prophecy that might still exist, hidden in plain sight, waiting for discovery. Could it be that the Valley of Dry Bones is not just a vision in a book, but a living mystery, bridging the past and present, calling us to look closer, to question, to believe in what cannot be seen? As we journey into this story, picture the sounds around you, the crackle of dry bones shifting under unseen forces, the distant cry of wind through an empty valley, the faint flicker of hope in the shadows. The vision of Ezekiel challenges us to see beyond the surface of life, to perceive the unseen, to understand that redemption and restoration often come in ways we least expect. But what if I told you the truth was hidden in plain sight all along? That the prophecy, the vision, and the bones themselves carry a message that resonates not just with ancient Israel, but with the deepest chambers of our own hearts? That within this mysterious valley lies a secret waiting for those brave enough to listen, patient enough to see, and faithful enough to believe. The desert stretches before you like a sea of gold and shadow, waves of heat rising from the cracked earth, bending the horizon into shapes that seem almost alive. The sun beats down mercilessly, yet the wind carries whispers, faint as the memory of prayer, soft as the rustle of ancient scrolls long forgotten. Here in this barren expanse begins the story of a valley no ordinary eye has ever seen, the Valley of Dry Bones, the stage for a vision that would challenge the hearts of men and speak across centuries to the soul of humanity. Ezekiel was no stranger to desolation. He lived in exile, a prophet torn from the streets and temples of Jerusalem, his people scattered like the wind through distant lands. Each day, he walked among sorrow, witnessing despair and faithlessness, seeing the weight of broken dreams pressed upon the shoulders of his fellow Israelites. And yet, amidst the grief, a call echoed, faint, insistent, and impossible to ignore. It was the voice of God, a whisper that became a command. "Son of man, stand upon thy feet, and I will speak unto thee. Imagine if you can." Ezekiel rising in the quiet of a desolate morning, the sun still low over the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into eternity. The air was still, almost sacred, as though the very desert held its breath. Then, in that silence, the Spirit lifted him up, transported him, not through the roads he had walked, not through the temples he had left behind, but to a valley vast, stretching beyond sight, filled with the scattered remnants of life. Bones, bleached white under the relentless sun, lay broken and scattered like a puzzle left unsolved for centuries. Some were whole, others fragmented. Some piled high, others lying alone, forgotten, abandoned. Ezekiel's heart trembled. There was a strange rhythm to the desolation, a quiet that spoke louder than any noise, a stillness that seemed to carry the weight of judgment and the promise of resurrection all at once. The prophet's eyes moved from one end of the valley to the other, and he understood that this was not merely a vision, it was a message. Each bone, each fragment was a story, a soul, a testament to a people lost and yet not forgotten. God's voice came again, deep and resonant, echoing across the expanse of desolation. "Son of man, can these bones live?" Ezekiel, standing alone amidst the silence, felt the question pierce him. How could lifeless bones bleached by time and sun ever rise again? Yet the command was clear. Speak to them, call them to life, and witness the power that moves beyond human understanding. And so the prophet began. His voice, soft at first, grew firm, trembling with awe and reverence. The words were not his own. They came from beyond, carried on the breath of the Spirit. "O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Behold, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live." And as he spoke, the valley stirred. Not with wind or fire, but with something deeper, subtler. A movement beneath the surface, a shifting that no eye had anticipated. This valley, it seemed, had its own memory. Every bone bore the echo of a life once lived, a hope once nurtured, a song once sung in the streets of Jerusalem, the fields of Judea, and the homes now left behind. The dry air seemed to pulse, carrying the vibrations of centuries, as if creation itself leaned closer to witness what would come next. Some scholars have suggested that the bones were more than symbols, that they were relics, remnants of a people whose faith had waned, whose voices had fallen silent. And in that silence, the divine voice spoke with a clarity that could not be ignored. Ezekiel watched, and slowly, impossibly, the bones began to move. A single femur shifted, then another. A rib slid into place. The air was filled with a sound almost musical. The soft clatter of rebirth, a symphony of resurrection that seemed to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. It was as though the valley itself had been waiting, patient and eternal, for the prophet's command to awaken. Yet the vision was not merely miraculous. It was also terrifying. Ezekiel saw not just bones, but the fragility of life, the brevity of existence, the ease with which faith can wither under the heat of suffering and exile. Each bone that moved reminded him of the fragile human spirit, capable of despair, yet eternally poised for renewal. He understood then that this was not a story of judgment alone. It was a message of hope, a testament that even in the deepest desolation, life waits to be called forth. Legends passed down through generations speak of this valley in hushed tones, describing the valley as a living memory of Israel itself. Some say it lies hidden somewhere in the wilderness, where no map can mark its path, where only the Spirit can guide the faithful to its presence. Others argue it is a vision timeless and eternal, a symbolic landscape representing the cycle of death and rebirth, of faith lost and regained, of hope that can never truly be extinguished. Archaeological whispers hint at lost cities, ruins where the echoes of the past are tangible, and where fragments of faith endure like shards of pottery, fragile yet resilient. Scholars of prophecy have debated whether Ezekiel's vision was entirely metaphorical, or whether it concealed a coded message about the restoration of Israel, a prefiguration of redemption, and a forewarning of trials yet to come. And as these debates unfold, the story of the dry bones continues to captivate, to challenge, and to inspire. The origins of this prophecy remind us that faith often begins in exile, in moments of solitude and despair. It begins in the valleys of our lives where everything seems broken, where hope lies scattered like bones under the unforgiving sun. And yet it is here, in the quiet and the desolation, that the divine chooses to speak most clearly, calling life from death, light from darkness, and courage from fear. Ezekiel's vision set the stage for everything that would follow, a revelation that would ripple through history, a message that continues to challenge and inspire. The Valley of Dry Bones is not just a memory of the past. It is a living testament, a reminder that what seems lifeless can rise, that what seems forgotten can awaken, and that the hand of the divine can move in ways beyond understanding, restoring what was once lost. And as the prophet gazed upon the valley, he felt the stirrings of something greater, something unseen yet profoundly present, a promise whispered through time, that the story was far from over, that the bones would speak, and that the prophecy, hidden and sacred, would one day unfold in ways no human could foresee. And that's when the prophecy began to unfold. The valley trembled as Ezekiel's words echoed across the dry expanse, but the bones did not rise all at once. Some remained stubbornly in place, silent and unmoving, as if resisting the call of life. The prophet's heart sank, not in doubt of God's power, but in awe of the depth of human and spiritual struggle. For every soul ready to awaken, there were others weighed down by despair, disbelief, and fear, caught between what was commanded and what was known. God's voice came again, solemn and unyielding. Son of man, prophesy to the breath. Say unto the breath, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe upon these slain that they may live. The prophet lifted his voice once more, feeling the weight of the heavens pressing upon his shoulders. The air grew heavy, vibrating with a force invisible yet unmistakable. It was as though the very valley held its breath, waiting to witness the clash of divine will and earthly resistance. But the struggle was not merely physical. The bones, symbols of a nation long exiled, represented more than flesh. They were vessels of faith and doubt, hope and despair, obedience and rebellion. Some scholars suggest that the conflict in Ezekiel's vision mirrors the eternal battle within every human soul, the tension between surrendering to divine guidance and clinging to the illusions of control, pride and certainty. And in this spiritual theater, the stakes were nothing less than life, death, and the redemption of an entire people. As Ezekiel's voice rose and fell, the first of the bones rattled. A femur turned slightly, a rib shifted, as though testing the strength of its bonds to the earth. Yet the transformation was slow, fragmented, uneven. Some bones obeyed immediately, responding to the prophet's command and the breath of God. Others resisted, stubborn and silent, trapped by centuries of decay and disbelief. And in that moment, the prophet understood a truth that would echo through every age. Divine power alone cannot force the willing heart. Faith must answer, even when commanded. The valley's silence was punctuated by sudden gusts of wind, whistling through the bones like cries of anguish. Ezekiel sensed a presence beyond the visible, a darkness that opposed the light, a force that sought to hinder the work of resurrection. He felt it in the chill of the wind, in the oppressive heat of the sun, in the tremor beneath the ground. The conflict was not just of flesh and bone, but of spirit, of intention, of allegiance to the divine will. Here, in the heart of the valley, prophecy collided with resistance, and the struggle was as old as creation itself. Ezekiel's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for signs of movement, for the faintest glimmer of life stirring in the dry remnants. And then he saw it, a jawbone trembling, a vertebra tipping slowly forward, a hand reaching as if in silent plea. The miracle was taking shape, but it was uneven, fragmented, imperfect. And it was in this imperfection that the true lesson revealed itself. The divine plan works through struggle, through hesitation, through the human choice to rise or remain still. Some bones, scholars suggest, represent those who resist truth, who doubt, who cling to the comfort of despair. Others represent those willing to embrace hope, to submit, to awaken. The valley becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the fate of a nation, but the inner conflict of every believer. To trust when the path is unclear, to act when obedience requires courage, to rise when the weight of history threatens to keep one bound. Ezekiel's voice wavered, not from fear of God, but from the enormity of the task. How could one voice, one human soul, command life in a place so steeped in death? And yet he obeyed, calling to the breath that carried the power of the divine. "Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe upon these slain." The words were a bridge between heaven and earth, a call to the unseen forces that govern life and death, and a challenge to the bones themselves to respond. Then the winds rose, fierce and unseen, swirling through the valley like the fingers of God brushing across the earth. Dust and particles lifted from the ground, glinting in the sunlight like sparks of eternity. The bones rattled violently, some falling back into place, others shifting upright, forming structures that resembled human skeletons once more. The conflict reached a fevered pitch, motion and stillness, obedience and defiance. Life and death colliding in a spectacle both terrifying and awe-inspiring. And yet, even as the transformation unfolded, there was a shadow of hesitation. Not every bone obeyed immediately. Some remained unmoved, silent in their defiance. Ezekiel realized then that resurrection is never instant, never simple. Faith is tested, trust must grow, and even the divine command encounters the inertia of the world. The prophecy, powerful as it was, demanded patience, persistence, and courage. This is the essence of conflict within the vision, a struggle between divine intention and human resistance, between the unseen power of the Spirit and the weight of history, despair, and fear. The Valley of Dry Bones is not only a prophecy of national restoration, it is a reflection of the inner battlefield of the soul, where obedience is tested, courage is demanded, and hope must triumph over doubt. Ezekiel's eyes widened as he watched the first complete skeleton rise. Muscles and sinews formed as though invisible hands stitched them together. The bones began to assemble into a figure, then another, until a crowd of silent, resurrected forms filled the valley. Yet they remained lifeless, unanimated, waiting for the final spark. The struggle had not ended. Life required more than structure, demanded breath, motion, spirit. And here, in the stillness before the final awakening, the prophet glimpsed the greatest tension of all, the moment when faith and obedience would determine whether these bones truly lived or returned to dust. The wind howled again, carrying with it the weight of centuries, the echoes of judgment, and the promise of redemption. Ezekiel's voice rose once more, calling to the breath, urging the unseen force to awaken what had long been silent. The bones trembled in response, quivering under the power of divine command. Yet still, not all responded. Resistance lingered, a shadow that would not easily yield. And in that resistance, the vision became clear. Resurrection is never without conflict, and the path of faith is never without trial. Some scholars claim that this conflict in the valley mirrors every great moment of prophecy and human history. The tension between obedience and rebellion, between faith and doubt, between hope and despair. And as the prophecy unfolded before Ezekiel's eyes, it became more than a vision. It became a lesson for all generations, a living reminder that the journey from death to life, from despair to hope, is fraught with resistance, yet guided by a hand unseen but always present. And so the valley remained a place of tension, of struggle, and of anticipation. Bones rattled, some rose, some fell, some remained, waiting for the voice of faith to call them into motion. And Ezekiel understood with a clarity that pierced his soul that this was not only a vision of the past or a prophecy for Israel. It was a mirror for every believer, a landscape of conflict that exists within the human heart. And just as the breath began to stir the last of the silent forms, the prophet felt a chill that ran through the valley, a warning that even miracles require vigilance. Not all who rise are ready. Not all who awaken will survive the test of faith. And as the wind swirled and the bones quivered in anticipation, a shadow passed across the valley. a sign that the conflict was far from over. And that's when the first whispers of truth began to emerge. The valley had shifted. Where once bones lay scattered, now skeletons stood assembled, silent yet expectant. The sun cast long, flickering shadows, as if the earth itself leaned closer to witness the impossible. But still they were not alive, merely structures of memory and time. Ezekiel felt the weight of anticipation, his heart pounding with the realization that the final step was yet to come. Life, the breath of God, had not yet filled them. Then a stillness unlike any before fell upon the valley. The wind stilled, the sun paused in its descent, and even the dust seemed to hover in reverent suspension. It was in that silence that Ezekiel perceived the first glimmer of understanding. The vision was not merely of bones or resurrection. It was a revelation of truth, hidden, sacred, and eternal. The valley itself had become a stage, the bones actors, and the Spirit of God, the unseen director, orchestrating a story that transcended time. The prophet's voice, trembling yet unwavering, rose once more. "O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. The Lord God says to these bones, Behold, I will bring you back to the land of Israel." The words hung in the air like incense curling and rising toward the heavens. And then it happened. Slowly, deliberately, impossibly, the bones began to move as if guided by an invisible hand. Tendons, flesh, and sinew formed in a symphony of creation, each movement precise, purposeful, miraculous. Ezekiel understood then that revelation is never passive. It requires engagement. The bones did not rise in chaos but according to divine order. Every piece, every fragment, every form answered the call with a willingness born of the unseen. And in that moment, the prophet glimpsed a universal truth. Life itself is a covenant, a partnership between the divine and the willing human heart. The miracle was not imposed. It was invited, summoned by faith, obedience, and trust. And then, as he watched in awe, the first breath entered the newly formed bodies. It was a wind unlike any earthly wind, a subtle current carrying not just air but spirit, essence, and consciousness. It flowed into the lungs of the once dead, and they stirred, eyes opening to the sun, hearts beating with renewed purpose. The valley echoed with the sound of awakening, a quiet, trembling chorus of life returning where death had reigned. The revelation did not end there. Ezekiel's vision deepened, revealing layers of meaning hidden beneath the surface of the miracle. The bones represented more than individuals. They symbolized entire generations, the collective spirit of a people scattered and oppressed. Each movement, each breath, each heartbeat carried a story of faith tested, of despair endured, and of hope rekindled. The prophet saw that divine truth often comes in stages. First recognition of the problem, then transformation, and finally the illumination of purpose. Some bones, the prophet noted, resisted longer than others. Their hesitation was not failure, it was revelation. Those who resisted revealed the depth of human fear and doubt, the struggle of a soul confronting the unknown. They reminded Ezekiel, and all who would hear the story, that truth is not always immediate, that awakening is often gradual, and that divine patience exceeds human understanding. Every delay, every tremor of hesitation was itself a message. Growth and restoration are processes, sacred and deliberate. As the newly risen stood, Ezekiel heard a whisper not in words, but in understanding. The valley was not merely a symbol of past exile, but a mirror of ongoing spiritual awakening. The truth revealed to him was as much personal as it was national. Just as Israel had been scattered, so too can faith be scattered in the hearts of men. Just as bones had to be called to life, so too must hope be nurtured, courage summoned, and belief awakened within the individual soul. Legends tell of mystical encounters in the valley that went beyond sight and sound. Ezekiel perceived shadows of angels moving among the resurrected forms, guiding, guarding, and whispering wisdom only partially understood. Some bones, it seemed, responded first to human obedience, while others awaited divine touch. The revelation was twofold. First, that obedience and faith are inseparable partners. Second, that the divine often works through layers of unseen guidance, gentle but powerful, shaping destiny with infinite patience. The prophet's vision grew even more profound as the breath of God continued to animate the valley. Eyes blinked open with wonder, hearts beat with purpose, and a sound like a chorus of souls lifted across the desert. The miracle was no longer just physical. It was spiritual, moral, and prophetic. Ezekiel saw the connection between human action and divine will, that restoration requires participation, that hope is not granted but awakened, and that faith is the bridge between desolation and life. And yet the revelation carried a warning. The Spirit made clear that life restored is not life without responsibility. Those who had been awakened now bore the weight of choices, of obedience, and of the covenant. The valley was not a promise of easy triumph. It was a reminder that divine truth carries with it demands. Freedom, restoration, and redemption are gifts, but they require vigilance, humility, and alignment with higher purpose. In this stage of the vision, Ezekiel perceived the prophetic timeline stretching far beyond his exile. He saw the cycles of faith and doubt, sin and redemption, pride and humility, played out in the generations yet to come. The dry bones were not merely historical symbols. They were eternal markers of human possibility, a warning and a promise written into the very fabric of creation. And as he watched, he realized that the revelation of truth is rarely immediate. It emerges gradually in stages through struggle, patience, and divine guidance. Archaeologists and scholars today suggest that remnants of this vision might still echo in the earth, in ancient sites scattered across Israel, in relics hidden beneath layers of dust, in symbols etched into temples long destroyed. These are not miracles of modern eyes, but echoes of revelation, waiting for those willing to see, to understand, and to believe. The Valley of Dry Bones, while anchored in prophecy, remains alive in its spiritual resonance, whispering truths about life, death, faith, and divine intention. Ezekiel's heart swelled as he observed the final stage of the miracle. The resurrected forms stood complete, eyes bright with recognition, limbs strong, hearts beating in unison with the rhythm of divine breath. And then came the final whisper, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. The valley had revealed its deepest secret. Life is never solely restored by power alone. It is awakened through understanding, guided by purpose and nurtured by faith. The bones had been called, moved, and filled, not arbitrarily, but in accordance with a divine logic that intertwined human action with spiritual destiny. And in that moment, Ezekiel knew that prophecy, revelation, and human agency are inseparable. The Valley of Dry Bones was not just a vision of restoration. It was a revelation of truth, eternal and unchanging, demonstrating the interplay of faith, obedience, and divine guidance across time and space. The lesson was clear. Even the most hopeless, broken, and forgotten can be awakened when aligned with divine purpose. Yet as the prophet gazed across the valley, a sense of mystery remained. For while the bones had risen, some shadows lingered. Not every whisper of resistance had vanished. Not every secret of the valley had been revealed. And in that lingering uncertainty, Ezekiel felt a deep anticipation. The story was still unfolding, the prophecy still breathing, and the ultimate lessons of life, death, and resurrection had yet to fully manifest. And that's when the turning point became inevitable. The valley, once still and silent, now hummed with life. The resurrected forms of the dry bones stood upright, whole and completed. Yet a strange tension lingered in the air. It was as though the miracle itself had drawn a line between obedience and hesitation, between the willing and the reluctant, between faith fulfilled and faith withheld. Ezekiel understood that the turning point had arrived, not in the rising of the bones, but in the choices that would follow. The breath of God, still moving through the valley, illuminated truths unseen. Each figure carried not only new life, but a moral weight, a responsibility to walk in alignment with divine will. And yet in this awakening some faltered. Fear gripped hearts that had just learned to beat again. Doubt shadowed eyes that had just opened. Even within resurrection, there was the possibility of collapse. The Spirit whispered to Ezekiel, "Life restored is not life perfected. Judgment follows awakening. Obedience must be proven, or the fall will follow." Ezekiel turned his gaze to the figures whose eyes held the faintest flicker of hesitation. These were the ones who had resisted the initial command, who had questioned the voice of God, even as they were assembled. The prophet's heart ached as he realized the depth of human frailty. Restoration is a gift, yes, but it demands courage, humility, and trust. Without these, even miracles can falter, and blessings can turn to burdens. The valley trembled once more, this time with an unseen force. A wind swept through, not gentle as before, but sharp, carrying a sound like distant thunder. The resurrected forms staggered, some wobbling in place, others collapsing back to the ground as if the weight of their own doubt pulled them downward. The miracle, magnificent though it was, revealed a profound truth. Life once restored can be lost again if faith falters. Even the divine cannot compel obedience. The human soul must choose. And then Ezekiel saw the shadow moving among them. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A darkness curling around certain figures, a chill that defied the desert sun. Scholars later would debate whether this shadow represented lingering sin, fear, or an external spiritual opposition. But to Ezekiel it was clear. The turning point had arrived. Life had been given, but life required alignment with purpose. Those who refused, even in the face of the miraculous, would fall again. The prophet called out to them, his voice carrying over the wind. Hear the word of the Lord. Stand firm. Walk in the ways I show, for the breath of God has made you alive. But the warning went unheeded by some. A few figures recoiled, stepping backward, as though the very light that filled the valley burned their eyes. Others began to murmur amongst themselves, questioning, debating, resisting the order that had brought them from death to life. And in this rebellion, Ezekiel saw the ancient lesson repeat itself. The closer one comes to salvation, the sharper the choice between obedience and pride, between redemption and ruin. The valley became a theater of moral tension. One by one, some figures faltered, knees buckling under invisible weight, eyes dimming as doubt took hold. Others hesitated, frozen by fear, unable to move forward. And then came the subtle, terrifying sound. The first whispers of collapse, the soft thud of flesh against sand as a figure fell back, returning to dust. The miracle, though astonishing, was not absolute. It demanded integrity, courage, and humility. Without these, even resurrection could not endure. Ezekiel's eyes filled with tears as he witnessed the first real fall. One of the figures, fully formed and breathing just moments before, recoiled from the call to obedience and collapsed. The bones scattered once again, the wind carrying the fragments like confetti of mortality. The valley shuddered under the weight of this lesson. Life restored is fragile. Faith once regained must be nurtured. The path of obedience is narrow, and the consequences of failure immediate. The prophet understood that this turning point mirrored the history of Israel itself. Just as the bones rose only to falter under hesitation, so too had the nation risen after exile, only to be tested repeatedly by pride, disobedience, and fear. The vision was more than allegory. It was a prophecy in motion, a divine warning that the cycles of obedience and rebellion, restoration and fall, repeat endlessly until the human soul aligns fully with God's will. And yet, amidst the fall, there were those who did not stumble, figures who had embraced the miracle, who trusted in the Spirit, who walked steadily despite the uncertainty and fear. Their steps were deliberate, their hearts aligned with purpose. Ezekiel observed them, understanding that revelation and resurrection are inseparable from choice. The turning point is not merely a moment of external change, but the internal awakening of courage, trust, and unwavering faith. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley, the contrast between those who fell and those who rose became starkly clear. Some forms stood tall, illuminated by the final rays of light, while others lay broken and scattered, reminders that blessing alone does not guarantee endurance. Ezekiel felt the weight of this lesson press upon him. Divine power provides opportunity, but human responsibility determines outcome. Restoration is a partnership between heaven and earth, miracle and will, breath and obedience. The prophet then perceived another layer of the turning point, the consequence of collective failure. The valley was not just a mirror of individuals, but of the people as a whole. Those who faltered represented more than themselves. They reflected a communal risk, a warning that disobedience affects more than the self. The breath of God can awaken life, But harmony, unity, and purpose require cooperation and faithfulness. The fall of one can ripple through the many. Just as the rise of one can inspire the collective, Ezekiel's voice rose in prayer, a plea not just for the bones, but for the lessons they represented. Lord, grant them understanding. Strengthen the hearts that tremble. Guide those who falter back to your path. And in that moment, the prophet felt a subtle shift. Even those who had fallen were not lost completely. The valley's lesson was ongoing. Redemption is not a single event, but a process. And the turning point is merely the beginning of the journey toward full restoration. As the night crept in, stars piercing the darkened sky like distant watchful eyes, the valley seemed to settle. The figures who had embraced life stood firm, illuminated by the silver light, while those who had fallen lay in quiet disarray. The turning point had been reached. The miracle had revealed not only the power of God, but the fragility of human choice. Restoration requires courage. Obedience is tested at the moment of awakening, and even miracles demand the surrender of the heart. And in the stillness that followed, Ezekiel understood the ultimate truth of the turning point. Resurrection is never only physical. It is moral, spiritual, and eternal. The fall is part of the process, a reminder that life, even when given anew, is not guaranteed. The path forward is fraught with tension, requiring vigilance, faith, and the humility to follow the voice of the divine. And just as the prophet turned his gaze toward the horizon, he sensed it, a subtle, unbroken whisper, promising that even in fall there is hope, and even in failure, there is the seed of ultimate revelation. And that's when the unseen continuation began to whisper its secrets. The valley, once a stage of bones rising and falling, now lay cloaked in quiet, a stillness deeper than night itself. Yet within that silence something moved, not in the eyes, hands, or hearts of the resurrected, but beneath the surface of the earth, in the hidden folds of time and space. Ezekiel felt it in the soles of his feet, in the subtle vibrations under the sand, in the air that whispered secrets older than memory. The prophecy, he realized, was far from complete. What had been revealed was only the beginning. The continuation remained unseen, hidden, and waiting for those who dared to perceive it. Some scholars today suggest that hidden continuations are the messages that Scripture hides between the lines, the codes, the visions, the spiritual truths accessible only to eyes willing to look beyond the obvious. Ezekiel, standing in the heart of the valley, understood this intuitively. The bones, risen and trembling, were symbols of life restored, yes, but what of the truths not yet spoken? What of the whispers beneath the wind, the shadows that flickered but were never fully illuminated? The hidden continuation was a divine promise, one that stretched across generations, touching past, present, and future. Ezekiel walked among the resurrected forms, now fully animated yet still learning to breathe. To walk, to understand the rhythm of life given anew. He noticed subtle differences. Some bones carried the weight of lessons learned quickly, others lagged behind, hesitant, wary of the unseen. The valley, he realized, was not merely a place of rebirth. It was a map of spiritual evolution, revealing that resurrection itself is a journey, and that true awakening comes not at the moment of breath, but in the continued alignment with divine purpose. And then he saw it, a flicker at the edge of vision, subtle and elusive, like sunlight refracting through dust. The ground seemed to pulse, as though carrying memory beneath its surface, a whisper of events long past yet eternally present. Ezekiel bent low, running his hands along the earth, and felt a hum, a vibration of life and truth beyond the scope of ordinary perception. This, he realized, was the continuation hidden within the valley, the secret promise that even death cannot obscure. Divine truth always endures, awaiting those who seek it with persistence and faith. The breath of God still lingered in the air, mingling with this hidden force. The resurrected looked around, sensing something but unable to see it fully. Their eyes glimmered with curiosity, awe, and the faint shadow of understanding. Ezekiel spoke to them softly, his voice carrying a reverence that seemed to touch the very ground. The Lord works not only in the visible, but in what lies beneath. What you see now is only part of his plan. There are truths yet unseen, paths yet untraveled, and mysteries that will unfold in time. In that moment, the prophet understood the spiritual principle at the heart of the hidden continuation. Revelation is layered. What is given to human understanding immediately is only a fragment. Deeper truths require patience, vigilance, and continued openness to the divine. The valley had revealed resurrection, judgment, obedience, and the consequences of hesitation. But it had not yet revealed the ultimate secrets, the interconnectedness of past, present, and future, and the ways in which the divine plan threads through every soul. Ezekiel's vision expanded, showing him glimpses of events far beyond the valley. He saw the exiled people returning, carrying stories of hope, sorrow, and renewal. He saw cities rising and falling, leaders making choices that echoed the obedience or rebellion of the bones, and he saw individuals generations later, grappling with their own valleys of despair, awaiting the hidden hand of guidance that could awaken them as the bones had been awakened. The hidden continuation, he realized, was eternal. It is the unfolding of life, the ripple of faith through time, the constant invitation to rise from despair and align with the divine will. The prophet walked slowly through the valley, touching the faces of the resurrected. Each one mirrored a lesson, a warning, or a promise. Some looked at him with gratitude, some with fear, some with wonder, and yet all were united by a single truth. Life, once restored, carries with it responsibility. Obedience and faithfulness are not just moral ideals, they are the bridge through which hidden truths become manifest. The valley, Ezekiel understood, was a teacher, and the bones were both students and lessons. Legends passed down describe the hidden continuation as containing relics, signs and whispers left for the faithful to discover. Some say scrolls buried beneath the valley hold additional prophecies. Others speak of stones etched with cryptic messages, invisible to all but the spiritually attuned. And some suggest that even the wind that moves through the valley carries coded knowledge, vibrations that can be understood only through prayer, meditation, and attentive heart. Ezekiel's vision, while rooted in the tangible miracle of resurrection, hinted at all these layers, revealing that the divine plan is vast, multifaceted, and beyond complete human comprehension. He raised his hands and called to the heavens, "Lord, teach me the depths of what you hide, so that I may guide your people faithfully." And the valley responded, not with noise or flame, but with a subtle, almost imperceptible hum, a resonance that filled the prophet with awe. It was as if the unseen had been listening all along, and now, for a brief moment, it acknowledged his presence. Ezekiel understood that the hidden continuation is patient. It does not reveal all at once, but waits for those willing to endure, to persevere, and to trust beyond sight. The night fell fully over the valley, stars igniting like embers in the sky. Shadows danced over the bones, now alive and aware, as the hidden continuation whispered through every movement. Ezekiel sensed the eternal rhythm of the prophecy. What rises can fall, what falls can rise again, and what remains hidden contains the keys to understanding not only life and death, but the divine pattern woven into human existence. Each flicker of wind, each subtle tremor in the earth, each whisper in the silence carried messages meant to guide, to warn, and to illuminate. As he stood there, the prophet realized that the valley itself was alive with stories yet untold. The bones had risen, the breath had entered, the fall had taught, and the hidden continuation now awaited the faithful who would carry the lessons forward. Every human soul, he understood, contains its own valley of dry bones, moments of despair, loss, or exile where hope seems impossible. And in each of these valleys, the same principles apply. Awakening requires patience, faith, obedience, and attentiveness to the unseen, for the continuation is always present, ready to guide those willing to listen. Ezekiel looked at the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to brush the edges of the desert. He knew the vision would endure far beyond his lifetime. The hidden continuation was eternal, an unfolding mystery bridging past and future, revealing that life, faith, and divine truth are never static. Even when human hearts falter, even when the world seems broken, the unseen hand continues its work, inviting all who are willing to rise, to walk, and to live in accordance with the divine will. And in that silent, sacred valley with bones risen, lessons learned, and mysteries yet to unfold, Ezekiel whispered a prayer that the hidden continuation, the eternal truth, would reach all hearts willing to see, and that no shadow of doubt could extinguish the light that life, faith, and obedience together create. And that's when the ultimate revelation awaited, ready to illuminate the connection between the divine, the prophecy, and the human heart. The first light of dawn painted the valley in gold and shadow, illuminating the risen forms of the once dead with a surreal, almost divine glow. The wind, soft yet insistent, carried the echoes of every moment, the fall, the awakening, the hidden continuations whispering beneath the earth. Ezekiel stood at the center, heart pounding, knowing that what he was about to witness was the culmination of vision, prophecy, and divine truth. All the lessons of obedience, of faith, of hesitation, and of resilience were converging into a revelation that would echo far beyond the desert and the bones beneath his feet. It began subtly. A shimmer moved through the resurrected figures, as though an invisible current of understanding flowed through each one. Eyes that had opened to life now opened to comprehension. Hearts that had hesitated now beat in harmony with a rhythm older than the sun. Ezekiel felt it in his own chest, a vibration of awe, of certainty, and of holy insight. He understood then that the miracle had been more than restoration of flesh and bone. It had been the awakening of consciousness itself, a revelation of the divine order that governs life, death, and all human choice. The Spirit whispered through the valley, barely audible yet unmistakable. Behold, the truth that has always been hidden yet present, now unveiled. And in that whisper, Ezekiel saw the full scope of the prophecy. The valley, the bones, the breath, the rise and the fall, they were not isolated events. They were a living, breathing metaphor for the eternal dance between human free will and divine guidance. Every hesitation, every fall, every act of faith carried a lesson, a ripple through time and soul. And then the vision deepened. Ezekiel saw the resurrected forms begin to glow with a light that seemed not of the sun or fire, but of the Spirit itself. The light illuminated their eyes, their hearts, and even the space between the bones and the earth. It was as though the valley itself had become a conduit for revelation, a sacred theater in which the invisible truth of God's plan unfolded before mortal eyes. He realized with awe that this revelation transcended the valley, the nation, and even his own life. It was universal, eternal, a blueprint for every soul that walks the path between despair and awakening. The prophet heard the whispers of the wind transform into voices, not harsh, not commanding, but gentle, reverent, and unmistakably divine. They spoke of cycles, of restoration and fall, of choices that echo across generations. Each word revealed that resurrection is not merely an act of God's power. It is a covenant with those who receive it. Life is restored, yes, but it is given not to be possessed, but to be lived, guided by understanding, faith, and alignment with the divine will. Every bone, every heartbeat, every breath in the valley carried this truth. Ezekiel's eyes were drawn to the figures who had faltered during the turning point. Some still trembled, uncertain, hesitant to embrace the final revelation, but even their uncertainty was illuminated by the Spirit. The prophet realized that revelation is not only for the ready, it is for those who wrestle, who question, who hesitate. The divine truth does not punish doubt. It invites engagement, courage, and reflection. And as he watched, some of those who had faltered began to rise once more, steadied not by force but by the invitation of understanding, the realization that life and faith are inseparable. Then came the most profound moment. The valley, the bones, the resurrected, everything shimmered with a light that defied mortal description. Ezekiel perceived the ultimate connection, that the resurrection of the dry bones was not merely historical, prophetic, or symbolic. It was a mirror of every human heart. Each soul carries its own valley, its own desolation, its own longing for breath, for purpose, for alignment with the divine. And in that mirror, the prophet saw the ultimate revelation. The same Spirit that animates bones, restores nations, and whispers secrets beneath the earth also dwells within each person willing to awaken. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse with energy as the revelation unfolded further. Ezekiel saw the patterns of history, of human struggle mirrored in the movements of the valley. Pride, fear, doubt, obedience, all recurring in endless cycles across generations, nations, and individuals. Yet interwoven with this repetition was divine intention, a hidden continuity, a guiding hand, a rhythm that ensures life can rise again even after collapse. Every fall carries the seed of restoration, every hesitation the potential for understanding, every act of faith the promise of eternal alignment. And in that moment, the Spirit revealed to Ezekiel the profound truth of divine patience. God's timing, he understood, is not measured by human expectation. The breath may come slowly, the awakening may seem delayed, the revelation may appear hidden, but nothing is wasted, nothing is lost. Even the bones that fell during the turning point were not abandoned. They were part of the continuum, part of the eternal plan that ensures every willing heart can ultimately rise. The valley was teaching him that divine wisdom operates beyond time, beyond judgment, beyond the limitations of mortal perception. Ezekiel's own heart beat in rhythm with the valley, as he finally perceived the ultimate insight: resurrection. Revelation and divine truth are inseparable. The bones rose because they were called, the breath entered because it was offered, and the Spirit illuminated because the willing responded. Yet every act of awakening requires choice. Human cooperation is essential. The miracle cannot exist without the readiness of the soul, the courage to embrace life, the humility to align with the divine will. This, he understood, was the ultimate revelation. The divine does not act alone. It works in partnership with those who are willing to rise. The valley seemed to expand infinitely, revealing layers of meaning that stretched across time and space. Ezekiel glimpsed the past, the present, and the future intertwined, the exiled nation returning home, individuals finding faith in their own valleys, generations learning lessons of obedience, hope, and courage. The hidden continuation he had sensed earlier now unfolded fully. Life restored is not an endpoint, it is a beginning, a perpetual invitation to engage with divine purpose, to participate in the eternal rhythm of creation, fall and restoration. And then, in the final moment of revelation, Ezekiel saw the light coalesce into a vision of unbroken hope. Every bone, every resurrected form, every whisper of the wind and every pulse of breath came together in a symphony of understanding. The valley had taught him, and would teach all who come after, that human despair is never final, that even the most broken can rise, and that the ultimate truth is both heavenly and human. Life, faith, and divine guidance are intertwined, eternal, and ever-present for those who choose to see, to trust, and to awaken. Ezekiel knelt in awe, feeling the Spirit move through him, through the valley, through every soul across time. The revelation was complete. The miracle of the dry bones was never about the bones alone. It was about the eternal interplay between divine power and human will, between faith and choice, between despair and hope. And as the sun rose fully, casting the valley in golden light, he understood that the ultimate truth is not hidden. It is revealed to those with hearts willing to hear, eyes willing to see, and souls willing to rise. And in that sacred, silent, eternal moment, the prophet whispered, "The Lord restores not only what is broken, but what is willing. The Spirit breathes, the bones rise, and the willing shall live forever, guided by truth unseen yet ever present."